So today I want to talk about Mifepristone and the law. In their continued assault on abortion access, Christian nationalists have been utilizing the power of the law and the state to further their agenda. This time, their target is an important medication known as Mifepristone. For those of you who are not aware, Mifepristone is one of the two medications that, when taken together in correct dosages, will induce a medicinal abortion. The function of mifepristone in these cases is to block progesterone from binding with receptors in the body. In combination with misoprostol, another drug which of course is being targeted by Christian nationalists, mifepristone is safely used in over half of all abortions in the United States. And despite its safety and its effectiveness, the legality of mifepristone is currently in the hands of the Supreme Court. Yes, the very same Supreme Court that has a conservative supermajority and overturned Roe v. Wade. Now, while I could sit here and remind people of how safe the medication is and try to defend it in this way by pointing out that it has a lower complication rate than common procedures such as wisdom tooth extraction or colonoscopies, or by showing that it has a 23 times lower rate of deaths per 100,000 pills than aspirin, the trouble is that these logical and medically sound arguments have not stopped mifepristone from being examined through a political lens, especially when it comes to abortion, even when it's been approved by the FDA. And yes, even the FDA has looked at it through this lens. And that certainly won't stop now with the legal assaults that have been carried out by Christian nationalists as they continue to wield more power. The US FDA made a political decision to place mifepristone in the case of pregnancy in a unique position among medications. The FDA has the ability to impose what's known as a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, or REMS, on certain medications. Now, the types of drugs that are usually given REMS are usually drugs like opioids or medications that can cause things like delirium and sedation that may require a different medical treatment than standard prescription medications that can be taken at home or received over the counter. Maybe because of that delirium, you need to stay in the office for an extended period of time or be monitored when that medication is administered. Again, that's the point of REMS. But up until recent decisions that were made during COVID, mifepristone could only be obtained in clinics, medical offices, or hospitals under direct supervision of a clinician, and before 2016, you even had to take the medication in the office itself. This meant that patients couldn't just get their pill by mail or in a pharmacy, despite the fact that it's safer than aspirin and doesn't have anything in common with pretty much any other REMS medication. Now, restrictions in this regard did get lifted somewhat during the pandemic. However, that didn't change the fact that providers still need to be specially certified to prescribe the medication, which adds their name to an abortion provider register that could put them subject to increased violence and harassment by Christian nationalist groups. Additionally, patients are required to jump through the extra hurdle of signing paperwork agreeing to have the pills dispensed to them. Also, if you doubt the political nature of this when it comes to abortions, mifepristone is also sold under the brand name Korlym, which was approved by the FDA without any REMS, and it's used in order to manage hyperglycemia in adults with Cushing syndrome. In this type of case, it's taken daily and at a higher dosage than what's given for abortions. So clearly, if it was safe for daily use, why would it be in some way, shape, or form unsafe for abortions? It's fine in this case, but not in the case of abortions. It's clearly a politically motivated decision. That said, this is where things more or less remained until two legal cases were ruled on this year. And incidentally, both rulings were given on the same day. Now, the first case in Texas featured a notorious Christian nationalist organization by the name of Alliance Defending Freedom, or the ADF. They represented the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine in their lawsuit against the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration of the US. In this lawsuit, the ADF tried to argue that mifepristone was not properly tested by the FDA when it was approved in the year 2000. Further, they argued that the way that the FDA approved it was not valid because somehow, under the formation and way that the FDA approved it, according to them, pregnancy had to be an illness, which they do not regard it as an illness, and therefore it was not validly approved. Finally, they appealed to an obscure law from the 1800s that prevents medication from being sent through the mail in order to counteract the recent changes that happened during the pandemic. Essentially, what they're trying to do here is use every nonsensical argument possible based around perceived loopholes in the law to try to pursue a way to push their agenda and change the way that things are handled. The result of this case was that on April 7th, a U.S. district judge, who of course was appointed by Trump, declared the FDA's approval of mifepristone to be illegal, which is pretty much unprecedented. But also, if it does become accepted as the law, this particular court case and the ruling, it would ban mifepristone nationally, not just in states like Wyoming that have explicitly banned it. Now, before I bring up the other case, I'd like to take a moment to remind everybody what the ADF has done and what they represent. The ADF is the same organization that created the model legislation for Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban, the very same one that was used to overturn Roe v. Wade. They were the ones who fought for religious exemptions from the Affordable Care Act in Burwell versus Hobby Lobby, and they are the same organization that sought to support and uphold Texas's sodomy laws in Lawrence versus Texas in 2003. They have fought hard for anti-trans legislation and have supported anti-LGBT legislation worldwide when we look at their international affiliates. They have also expressed support for an evangelical foster care provider in South Carolina that rejects Jewish, atheist, and LGBTQ prospective parents. They believe that separation of church and state is a bad thing, and that the law needs more Christianity. They are, in every sense of the word, a Christian nationalist group, further weaponizing the law to harm everyone that falls outside of their fascistic worldview. They also happen to have confirmed affiliations with people like Amy Coney Barrett of the Supreme Court and former Vice President Mike Pence. And it's also worth noting that ADF senior counsel Aaron Hawley is married to Missouri U.S. Senator Josh Hawley. Clearly, the fascism runs deep within the state, and they have funding and support to try to back up everything that they are trying to work towards. And it is especially scary given that Barrett, who's on the Supreme Court, is one of the people who gets to make a decision on this case, given her affiliation with ADF. Now, the very same day that the one ruling was done, another case that involves 17 states and the District of Columbia was decided. This case was a lawsuit by the 17 states and the District of Columbia to try to lift the FDA-imposed REMS on mifepristone. Because, of course, there's no reason for a safe medication to be restricted. And this, of course, was in response to some of the changes that had happened in the REMS in response to the Roe v. Wade decision being overturned. However, in typical liberal fashion, the judge adhered to the FDA decision. The only good thing that came out of this, and this protection of the status quo in this moment, is that it ensured, according to the law and this particular case and the ruling by this judge, that the 17 states and DC were not to have any changes made to the legality of mifepristone, even if the REMS were not lifted. This means that you had two judges essentially asking the FDA to do different things. Since on April 7th, what you had was one court case telling the FDA, this medication's banned, and the other court telling the FDA, this court cannot be touched in these 17 states and the District of Columbia, it was a conflict that occurred between these two rulings. So since April 7th, things have been completely up in the air, but also still following the status quo from before April 7th at this time. Now, the appeals court that was involved ended up deciding to reduce the time patients could use mifepristone from 10 weeks pregnant to 7 weeks pregnant for reasons, and eliminated the ability for it to be mailed for reasons. Again, these type of political decisions that are, of course, tied to Christian nationalist philosophy. However, the Supreme Court has since stepped in and imposed a stay that was supposed to end on Wednesday, and has now been extended an additional 2 days to Friday. This means that at the moment, everything pre-April 7th and the status quo that existed there remains for at least another day. However, this doesn't necessarily bode well, because just because they put things back to where it was doesn't mean they're going to rule in any sort of good way. It also means that the conservative Supreme Court, again with at least one member that's affiliated with the ADF, and therefore should have a conflict of interest, is going to make a decision on this medication that is going to significantly affect access to abortion. While I am certainly unable to predict the extent of the court's decision and how far they'll go, what I do know is that their decision is unlikely to be anything good, given that many places already have an extremely small window in place in which one can get a legal abortion, especially in these places with like 15-week or 12-week bans. The elimination of legal medically induced abortion could make getting access to abortion healthcare significantly harder, if not impossible. This is the go-to treatment for patients that are pregnant for less than 70 days from their last period. And again, I need to emphasize that whenever we talk about it, it's 70 days from the last period that you're allowed to use this mixture of drugs with mifepristone and misoprostol. So if you end up discovering, 3 or 4 weeks later, where some places had that quote unquote heartbeat bill, you were already affected. Now, if you're in a place with, say, something like a 8 or 10-week ban, you might lose access to the medically induced abortion that you were able to get through these 2 pills, which leaves surgical options only available, which are not usually recommended and are not as safe in this time frame as the 2 pills. It's just, this is the level of ridiculousness that we are looking at in the near future. Now, it is worth noting that if it is just the one medication and not both that end up getting banned, and they don't try to swing the full hammer and ban both pills, misoprostol can actually induce abortion alone with reduced effectiveness, but that's less than ideal. It is used in other countries that have banned the medication mifepristone, but again, it's a less than ideal outcome. The truth is that right now, anything short of a preservation of the old status quo with the REMS in place will have negative consequences for people and for their livelihoods. And anyone who wants to terminate their pregnancy or, needs any sort of support or is, in any way, shape, or form married or related to somebody who needs to terminate their pregnancy, this is going to affect a lot of lives and livelihoods. And this is also going to affect people who need to get an abortion for life-saving reasons. So all of this is just, again, the attacks of Christian nationalists putting forward all of their ideals and perspectives using the full weight of their funding, the state support that they have, and anything else that they can wield in order to change the laws in order to further their interests in a way that will just do nothing but harm towards people. With that said, of course, though, if you've learned something here today, I ask that you consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment, as well as consider joining my Discord, where we talk about important topics like this. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially it goes a long way for me producing a lot of these videos, and political content like this can often be demonetized on YouTube. The links for everything that I've mentioned are in the description down below. With that said, my name is Anarchist Tara. Thank you so much for watching.